Moments ago, the committee unanimously voted to subpoena former President Trump for testimony about his conduct during and around the attack on the Capitol. The motion was offered by the committee vice chair, Wyoming Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who was essentially run out of her party and office by the former president. It's a big headline, but it's unlikely to result in the former president's sworn testimony. The subpoena is set to expire at the end of this congressional term, and enforcing a subpoena can sometimes take months or even years, especially one that comes from Congress. In fact, the more pressing legal risks facing Mr. Trump likely stem from new revelations around the Department of Justice's investigation into the removal of those highly sensitive documents that may still be, some of them, at his estate in Florida. We're going to have much more on that aspect of the various investigations into Donald Trump in a moment. That said, today's hearing on Capitol Hill was not without its dramatic and at times historic moments, including never-before-seen footage of some top congressional lawmakers sheltering during the attack on the Capitol. The footage contained audio of Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer on the phone with governors, the Secretary of Defense, the acting Attorney General, frankly doing what the president should have been doing while the Capitol was under siege. Much of this footage apparently came courtesy of Speaker Pelosi's daughter, Alexandra Pelosi, who was documenting things at that day, at that time. Take a listen.
They need massive personnel now. Can you get the Maryland National Guard to come too?
I have something to say, Mr. Secretary. I'm going to call the mayor of Washington, D.C. right now and see what other outreach she has to other police departments, as Leader Hoyer has mentioned. They're breaking windows and going in, obviously ransacking our offices and all the rest of that. That's nothing. The concern we have about personal safety is it just transcends everything. But the fact is, on any given day, they're breaking the law in many different ways. And quite frankly, much of it at the instigation of the President of the United States. And now, if he could at least somebody.
Yeah, why don't you get the president to tell them to leave the Capitol, Mr. Attorney General, in your law enforcement responsibility? A public statement, they should all leave.
Just pretend for a moment it was the Pentagon or the White House or some other entity that was under siege. And let me say, you can logistically get people there as you make the plan.
Building on past hearings, the committee also played new testimony from witnesses, making it clear that the former president knew he lost the 2020 election well before his push to overturn the results of January 6th.
So we're in the Oval and there's a discussion going on. And the president says, I think it could have been Pompeo, but he says words to the effect of, yeah, we lost, we need to let that issue go to the next guy, meaning President Biden.
I remember maybe a week after the election was called, I popped into the Oval just to give the president the headlines and see how he was doing. And he was looking at the TV and he said, "Can you believe I lost to this effing guy?"
Mark raised it with me on the 18th. And so following that conversation, we're the motorcade ride driving back to the White House. And I said, does the president really think that he lost? And he said, a lot of times he'll tell me that he lost, but he wants to keep fighting it. And he thinks that there might be enough to overturn the election, but he pretty much has acknowledged that he's lost.
Additionally, the committee disclosed today that it had gained access to more than 1 million Secret Service documents since its last hearing. And the session today painted a picture of a Secret Service that ignored warnings in the days and hours before the attack on the Capitol that the crowd was angry and could turn violent.
In this report, received on December 26th, the Secret Service field office relayed a tip that had been received by the FBI. According to the source of the tip, the Proud Boys plan to march armed into D.C. They think that they will have a large enough group to march into D.C. armed, the source reported, and will outnumber the police so they can't be stopped. The source went on to say their plan is to literally kill people. Please take this tip seriously and investigate further.
One of the clear takeaways from this hearing is that the Secret Service has a ton to answer for, and perhaps it's worthy of an entire new investigation into why the Secret Service spent so long concealing what they knew in advance. They knew what was going to happen, and in fact, had their own Secret Service detail get prepared for entering into a violent situation. And while the committee may put out more information before the election, this hearing is essentially a long closing statement for what they've dug up so far. Former impeachment manager and the committee member, Adam Schiff, spelled out their findings in a nutshell.
The president knew the crowd was angry because he had stoked that anger. He knew that they believed that the election had been rigged and stolen because he had told them falsely that it had been rigged and stolen. And by the time he incited that angry mob to march on the Capitol, he knew they were armed and dangerous. All the better to stop the peaceful transfer of power.
All right, let's dig into more of what we learned in today's hearing. I've got our senior national political reporter, Sahil Kapoor, with us. Chuck Rosenberg's a former U.S. attorney, senior FBI official, who's now an NBC News legal analyst. In a few minutes, I'll be joined by Washington Post investigative reporter Carol Leonnig, who's probably the world's foremost expert in the reporting world on the inner workings of the Secret Service. Sahil, let me start with this question that perhaps you've done some reporting or are able to answer this question. Why are we waiting until the nearly last minute of this investigative calendar, if you will, to issue the subpoena for the former president?
Well, Chuck, I think part of the reason is that the committee has considered this question for quite a while. There had been conflicting opinions within, and the committee appears to have made the decision in the final stretch that it does not want to finish its work without making clear, at least for the public record, that it did everything it could, that these findings rose to the gravity of subpoenaing a former president of the United States. That seems to be where the committee is headed with this. Now, they did say it will be a subpoena for documents and testimony. We can tell from the tenor of the last several hearings what they're going to want to ask Trump. And I think one of the big standout takeaways from this hearing, Chuck, is the extent to which the committee tried to establish the bad faith motive. They repeatedly tried to show that Trump was not only spreading falsehoods about the elections, but that he knew they were falsehoods. And it's so important because for the 1/3 of the country that believes the election was stolen, if that were actually the case, then everything that happened on January 6th, everything that led up to it, could conceivably be construed in a different light. This committee is trying to make clear that that was all a lie, that the former president knew it was a lie. And we saw from Alyssa Farah, the former aide, from Cassidy Hutchinson, who talked about how, Mark Meadows had heard Trump saying he knew he lost, he knows it's over, and still he persisted. So subpoena, it's hard to know where this goes, Chuck, but I will say this is likely to throw a wrench into the midterm election just 26 days away, where you're going to see some, Trump and his folks try to use it to stir up his base. I just heard from one prominent Republican who you might call a sometimes Trumper, doesn't love or hate the guy, who said this is certainly going to stir up Republicans. And for Democrats, it's going to elevate the salience of the former president, make the Trump issue burn a little brighter for those critics of his. Chuck
Rosenberg, let's go through the logistics of this subpoena. If, let's say, we didn't have an end date of January 2nd here, and they had more time, and we had 6 or 7 months, is this an executable subpoena in your mind? Meaning, could a Congress eventually win this fight in court if they had the time?
Could a Congress eventually win it with enough time? Maybe, if they demonstrated a compelling need. But here are a series of problems, Chuck. Number one, Mr. Trump is not well acquainted with the truth. So even if he were inclined to testify, and I doubt that he is, getting something useful, helpful, and truthful from him seems like a long shot. Also, remember, he has invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege in other settings. And so even if the Congress were to prevail, and even if he were inclined to tell the truth on some things, perhaps, Mr. Trump could still invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege, as could anybody, if a truthful answer would tend to incriminate them. And so I'm not sure this is a fight worth fighting. It may be a political statement, and I'm not well qualified to talk about politics. I'm a little bit better on the law. But I think this is a very long walk through dry sand.
Yeah, that's what it certainly appears to. Thus, it feels more symbolic than anything. I know we've got Carol Leonnig with us, and I got to play for the control room folks. It's SOT number 2, the clip. I want to play Adam Schiff and sort of some things that we have now learned what the Secret Service knew before the January 6th attack.
By the morning of January 6th, it was clear that the Secret Service anticipated violence. It felt like the calm before the storm, one agent predicted in a Protective Intelligence Division chat group. Another remarked how agents were watching the crazies on live stream. The documents we obtained from the Secret Service make clear that the crowd outside the magnetometers was armed and the agents knew it. Take a look at what they were seeing and hearing on the ground. One report from the rally site at 7:58 a.m. said, some members of the crowd are wearing ballistic helmets, body armor, carrying radio equipment, and military-grade backpacks. Another, from 9:30 a.m., said that there were possibly OC spray, meaning pepper spray, and or plastic riot shields. At 12:47 p.m., another agent responded, no doubt. The people at the Ellipse said they are moving to the Capitol after the POTUS speech. As the documents we received make clear, the Secret Service was aware of weapons possessed by those gathered at rallies in D.C. as early as the evening before.
Carol Lennick, is this dereliction of duty by an agency?
Todd, I mean, forgive me, Chuck, you know, I think what's so striking about this is there's been a lot of reporting by my paper and my team included about intelligence failures in the walk-up to January 6th. How many red flags there were about what was going to happen that day. All the prescient warnings of a violent mob coming for the Capitol and coming for Vice President Pence. But those agencies weren't the Secret Service. The Secret Service has an entire intelligence division that's in charge of assessing the risks at protests where the president is going to appear, at places where the vice president is going to appear. And on this day, you have the president on one end of downtown Washington and the vice president with his detail on the other end, and a crew of trained professionals in risk assessment have been sorting through 10 days worth of tips and warnings about a violent, armed group that wants to attack police, that wants to kill Vice President Pence, in one instance referring to him as dead man walking. Yeah. They are in possession of this information, and their number one mission is to protect both of these individuals. And there doesn't seem to be any indication that they changed any of their moves or tactics or steps other than trying to prevent Donald Trump from going to the Capitol that day as much as he wanted to go.
Carol, it is hard not to look at this and sit here and wonder about the former Deputy Chief of Staff and former Secret Service detail leader there, Tony Ornato, that he didn't have a huge role in some form of essentially preventing this from ever seeing the light of day, or certainly we didn't get any of this information until, you know, there had to, essentially Congress had to raise a ruckus over it in order to find different ways to find out what the Secret Service knew and when they knew it.
Well, I mean, any testimony by the White House Deputy Chief of Staff that he wasn't aware of any intelligence about threats to the protectees is just false on its face, because so many parts of the Secret Service had information about threats to the vice president. It wasn't a small and little tiny unit working alone that had this information. And you're so right, Chuck, to focus on this piece, because Tony Ornato, as hinted by the lawmakers today, is viewed as a not credible witness, a person who did not give accurate testimony. And you'll remember, Tony Ornato is also the person who privately disputed what Cassidy Hutchinson said, her startling bombshell testimony that President Trump physically lunged for his Secret Service detail leader. He was so angry at the idea that he couldn't go to the Capitol. He was grasping for the steering wheel and for the neck of his agent. Tony Ornato said that never happened, or he doesn't know about such a thing, and he hasn't said so under oath yet.
I think he had promised to do that, and we've yet to get that. Chuck Rosenberg, we heard Vice Chair Liz Cheney refer to the fact that multiple people may be held, that there may be multiple people that they have to issue criminal referrals to. If you're Mr. Ornato, how much do you need to lawyer up right now?
Well, lots of people who aren't going to be prosecuted, Chuck, are getting lawyers, and that's never a bad idea. If members of Congress or their staff or FBI agents are asking you questions. I mean, I don't know that Mr. Ornato has significant criminal liability, but for folks who are going
let me ask you this. He was not under oath, but let me ask you this. What is the statute that would, he did speak, is
it okay if I go?
If he lies if he essentially lies to them in his testimony, but it wasn't technically under oath, is he still potentially, could he be held essentially charged with perjury?
Yeah, you don't have to be under oath to commit a federal crime, right? I mean, one statute we use a lot, Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1001, makes it a crime to make a knowing false statement to the government, to an executive branch agency or to the Congress or to the courts. So you don't need to be under oath is the simple answer. But again, I don't know that folks are going to be prosecuted necessarily. I will also say this. Criminal cases are hard because you have to prove intent, something you and I have talked about. Right. So making a political case in a congressional hearing room is very different than making a criminal case in a courtroom. The second thing, the criminal case in a courtroom also comes with a very high standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So I don't think people should leap to that necessarily.
Carol Leonnig, you've got so many sources inside the Secret Service. Does the entire agency have a culture issue that needs to be weeded out, fixed? It certainly seems like there's, is it the current leadership, or is this something that was more from a couple years ago?
The culture of the Secret Service is, a little bit schizophrenic, I have to say, Chuck. One is it's a full of duty-bound, mission-focused, patriotic servants. They actually believe really faithfully in their role, protecting the stability of our democracy. But on the other side, there are people who have used the secrecy that shrouds a president's security to basically shroud and cover up misdeeds, incompetence, taking advantage of their powerful position for their own gain. And unfortunately, in this instance, more questions need to be asked about why, as you focused on Tony Ornato, why was Tony Ornato allowed to serve as a White House Deputy Chief of Staff when he's supposed to be in an apolitical job? And why was he, of all people, in charge of helping the president's movements and getting them achieved when he was a Secret Service official who was supposed to be making sure the president was safe?
Yeah, I'm still sort of haunted by the one piece of testimony that they had an anonymous voice on about, call it an insurrection, call it a coup, but we knew if the president showed up at the Capitol, things were going to change in a hurry. Carol Leonnig, I know you've got to, you're on a hard deadline. You've got to get going. Thank you. Sahil, let's talk about what's next. This was a don't call it a closing argument hearing. So what is the next time we hear from this committee? Is it in writing? And is it before the election? Is it after the election? It obviously has to be before noon on January 3rd.
That's right, Chuck. It remains to be seen when the next time we're going to hear from this committee is. We've seen in the past that the committee can be pretty agile and coming by, some new information and deciding immediately to schedule a hearing with about 24 hours notice. We saw that with Cassidy Hutchinson. Now, that is unlikely at this point, but that is always a possibility in my conversations with those on the committee, the staffers on the committee. They've never closed that door. There are some on the panel who want to hold another hearing to roll out the final report, which will include legislative recommendations, which will kind of put a bow on all of this. That is more likely than not to happen after the midterm election. And it's not even clear that the committee will hold another hearing. So this may have been the last time we ever see them in that room, Chuck. And the measures of success, I think, are as follows. Every time I've asked members of the committee, how do you define success? They always keep it abstract. They say our job is to tell the truth, to explain what happened. The committee will argue that they've done that. And I think many viewers can reasonably look and argue that they've done that. But I'll add a couple more. There's a question of public opinion. Have they convinced the country? On that score, it doesn't look like they have. We've seen very modest shifts in public opinion, but nothing major. And the final thing is perhaps the most important, legislation. What are they going to do about this? That on that score, they look like they have a pretty good chance of success here. The House has passed a bill to clarify the Electoral Count Act to make it harder to execute a coup in the future. A very similar bill is headed to passage in the Senate in the lame duck session. This could get done, and it could be a big, big deal if it does, Chuck.
Chuck Rosenberg, if you've got the totality of these hearings, we've made you be with us for all the hearings. I think you'd have watched them and digested them, even if we didn't make you do it. But let me ask you this. As a former U.S. attorney yourself, What do you believe is actionable here from Justice's side? What would you be digging into the most, given all this testimony that Congress has unearthed?
Yeah, I mean, these are clearly the witnesses that the Department of Justice and that FBI agents would want to speak to, Chuck. But what you saw, and I don't mean this as a criticism, rather just an observation, was a political case being made in that hearing room, not a legal case, and absolutely not a criminal case. So what I would have liked to have seen, and it may exist somewhere, just not in the public record, is really clear evidence of the president's intent, right? Big difference between what you're told and what you know. I spent, I think, a full year being told about calculus. And I can assure you, I can even prove it with my final grade, that I know absolutely nothing about calculus. So, you know, it's interesting to hear these people recount what they heard or what they overheard or what the president may have been told. But evidence of intent, the type of evidence you would bring in a criminal case, is quite different. And so, you know, that's why I'm a little bit, I don't know, I was going to say undecided, but I think I've decided that it would be a bad idea for the Congress to make a political referral to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice doesn't need it, and they presumably don't want it, because they want to work in an apolitical way, and getting a mostly partisan referral isn't going to help them do that.
Yeah, I think my feeling, I think the symbolic move came today, Chuck, but we shall see. And I want to shift legal gears here a little bit, but it's still in your bailiwick, Mr. Rosenberg, so please stand by. We've got some new developments in another investigation into Donald Trump, this involving the Department of Justice's criminal investigation into the documents that the former president was keeping at Mar-a-Lago. Sources confirmed to NBC News that one of Trump's Mar-a-Lago employees told FBI agents that the former president ordered boxes of documents to be moved before federal agents conducted their search. The source also told NBC that the FBI obtained surveillance footage showing people moving boxes out of storage at Mar-a-Lago. This witness account fills in some important details about Trump's actions in the lead-up to the FBI's execution of the subpoena to get these records in the time after it was issued to get those classified documents back. Now, this development was first reported by the Washington Post. A spokesperson for the former president kind of pushed back on the report. You got to read the statement carefully. The Biden administration has weaponized law enforcement and fabricated a document hoax in a desperate attempt to retain political power, i.e. they didn't actually answer anything about the charge or the fact of what this witness said. So joining me now is our Justice Intelligence correspondent, Ken Delaney, and Chuck Rosenberg is still here as well. And on the Hill, I have Ali Vitale. So, Ken, let's go through this, because what's unique about this witness is this is not necessarily a cooperating witness. This is somebody, and it certainly, to connect the dots here, it looks like because they subpoenaed the security footage at Mar-a-Lago, they saw this and then interviewed this person, and this is what we found out. Is that the basics here?
That's what it appears, Chuck, but we have to remember we're looking through a soda straw at a very small slice of this. You said this witness is unique. He or she may well not be unique. There may be multiple people at Mar-a-Lago they're talking to. It sort of underscores what I've been saying for a while, which is, you know, a lot of focus on the special master, even as we digest the Supreme Court rejecting Trump's appeal today. But the real action in this investigation is, what is the FBI getting from the witnesses who are telling them about what happened to these documents? How did the documents get to Mar-a-Lago? Who knew about them? Who moved them around? What did Trump do? And then, in particular, on this question of obstruction, because it's obvious by now that Donald Trump took with him documents that he shouldn't have taken, that were government property, and that some of them were highly classified, had classification markings on them. That we know. But there's this question looming out there. Did Donald Trump or somebody around him try to obstruct the investigation? And then when you hear that Donald Trump, according to this witness, ordered this person to move these documents after a grand jury subpoena had been issued, and potentially, it's not clear 100%, but potentially after one of his lawyers had assured the government that they had turned over all the classified information, that starts to lead us down this road. That, along with the revelation that the lawyer who signed that statement, Christina Bobb, is now saying that she was told by another lawyer, Evan Corcoran, to sign the statement, that she had no personal knowledge of whether the classified documents were there or not, and she insisted on the language being put into the sworn statement suggesting that. So you know, and that's where this starts to get really serious, because you can see an argument that the DOJ is not interested in charging a former president based on possessing documents that a current president had access to, but you shouldn't have had when he was a former president. But when it's hard for me to imagine they walk away from a case that Donald Trump or anyone else around him obstructed justice in this matter.
Well, let me bring back Chuck Rosenberg. Okay, on that front, Chuck, does Justice want to know why he was holding these documents and withholding them from the subpoena before they would charge, or does the intent not matter in this case?
Well, so you're actually talking about motive here.
Motive, excuse me, yeah.
As a strict matter, a strict legal matter, you don't have to prove motive in a criminal case. Absolutely not required. So if he was holding on to them for souvenirs, or if he was holding on to them to sell them to the Russian government, I mean, the second thing obviously being a lot more serious than the first thing, but that's motive. And it doesn't matter if you're not properly permitted to have them, then you can't have them. And if you keep them willfully and intentionally, then you've committed a crime. Just as if Ken Delaney robbed a bank. He might be doing it to put food on the table. He might be doing it because he's greedy, but his motive doesn't matter. But an obstruction of justice is a different thing, right? The entire criminal justice system depends on people telling the truth. Witnesses telling the truth, agents telling the truth, jurors telling the truth when they swear to judge facts impartially, lawyers telling the truth in the well of the court. And so when people obstruct an investigation, and I think you're quite right, this may not be I should say that Ken is quite right, this may not be the kind of case the Department of Justice would bring independently based on mere mishandling of classified information by a former president. But when you obstruct that investigation, you make it something different. And I think that could be problematic for the folks involved.
Hey, let me ask you a larger question, Chuck Rosenberg, for the Justice Department. And it's certainly got to be a question that's going to enter the mind of Merrick Garland, and that is enforcing the rule of law versus concern about the national interest, if those two things collide.
Yeah, so he has a very, very tough decision here. I mean, the rule of law, Chuck, is a construct, right? It's not like the law of gravity, which is immutable and applies everywhere all the time, at least on planet Earth. The rule of law is a construct, right? And it takes people, good men and women, to protect it and defend it and to prop it back up when it's knocked down a peg or two. I can make an argument for Merrick Garland not to charge this case in order to protect the rule of law, and I can make an argument for Merrick Garland to charge this case in order to protect the rule of law. Right? If you're the Attorney General of the United States, you don't get the easy ones. The easy ones are resolved 17 layers below you. You get the hard ones, and this is a hard one.
All right. Before I go to Ali Vitale, I want to circle back to the January 6th hearing, because I know she was just in a scrum and learned a whole bunch of new info. Ken Delaney, and another development on another part of the investigation, the special master, the Supreme Court. Quickly fill us in. The Supreme Court did something that a lot of people expected them to do based on the former president's appeal, but fill in the blanks for us. That's right.
As Chuck Rosenberg and other very smart people predicted, the Supreme Court essentially denied Donald Trump's appeal and left in place the 11th Circuit ruling, which took the classified documents that the FBI seized at Mar-a-Lago, took them out of the special master process and allowed the FBI to continue using them in their criminal investigation. So a resounding defeat for Donald Trump after this really verbose and lengthy brief that his lawyers filed, raising a lot of extraneous issues, but not the right ones for the Supreme Court, Chuck.
All right. And Ali Vitale, I feel like you just came out of the post-game scrum. We're trying to find out. I know you were able to overhear, talk to a few committee members. Tell me what you've learned. Specifically, I'm curious what committee members said in their scrum about why now with the subpoena? Why not sooner?
Yeah, that's a central question, Chuck. And when you and I were on the special, you watched me nearly get plowed over by Chairman Benny Thompson as he was walking by us on his way out of the hearing room. But what he said is that this is the moment that the committee decided they were ready to move forward with subpoena charges for the former president. It's a question that I've asked Thompson dozens of times, at least since the start of these hearings this summer, but certainly even before that when they were in their earlier phases of the investigation. And it was clear after the first few hearings this summer that Trump was the focal point. He was the continuous thread through all of the January 6th committee's work. And that led us to the question in the press corps, what happens when you do a successful job of convincing anyone convincible in the country that the former president played a role in fomenting the insurrection on January 6th. Clearly now they have found at least one answer to that. I think the fact that it's unanimous is telling about what could happen if or when they do a criminal referral. It's something that the vice chair of the committee, Liz Cheney, said just a few weeks ago, that she expects that decision would be unanimous if and when they make it. So this is really a blueprint for that. But look, you make this point on the special, you've made it here as well. The fact that this all takes time. We've watched the ways that people have decided to ignore subpoenas and the way and how long it takes to grind that through the legal system. This committee is 50-50 with the DOJ actually enforcing contempt. And that was just for people like Steve Bannon, who they enforced it for, and Mark Meadows, who they did not. And so certainly there are questions here about what would happen if this lands at the feet of DOJ. But certainly this is an escalation for a committee that has really been searching for an answer to the question of what to do about former President Donald Trump. And that's the thing that most members here have been saying to me, is that this is a moment where I think many of them felt it was inevitable. They wanted to put this at least on the record, because the other thing that's true is that A, Trump is great at running out the clock, and that's kind of all he has to do here. But B, this committee also knows that this was not going to be something where they issued the subpoena and he probably complied, though that probably would be the case with Pence. And I'm interested to see if that's a road that they go down too.
I was just going to say, you pre-butted my next question to you, which was, when will we get it? If we haven't heard from them today on a subpoena for the former vice president, does that mean it's not going to happen? One would assume that the clock really is ticking here if they also want to write a final report before January 3rd, 2023.
Yeah, great minds, of course, Chuck. I think with Pence, look, he has said that if he's subpoenaed, he would consider at least going before the committee. And we know from my conversations with committee members that they have been in active conversations with his legal team trying to figure out what that could look like if they subpoena the former vice president. And by the way, all of the people in Pence's orbit who complied with this committee, both the people who just spoke in videotaped deposition, also the folks who came in as witnesses, they did so under subpoena. They had to be compelled in some fashion to come forward and talk to the committee. Mike Pence's political prospects are already very complicated over this issue. If he were to come in and be subpoenaed, they would be similarly complicated, I would argue. But that's also something that could take some time, and they are very much on the clock. And in talking to a member this morning, the view was, it's good that we're doing the hearings, the public deserves to know, and also it's time for us to wrap it up and start putting this all in our final report, which has to come December 31st or sooner.
Ali Vitale, Ken Delanian, Chuck Rosenberg, really grateful for helping break all this down for us. Thank you. All up next, the last major economic report before voters go to the polls, at least on the pricing front. We will get one more jobs report before the polls. We got groceries, gas, airfares, and more, all up double digits compared to a year ago. What that means for the country, the midterms, all of that is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We got the last inflation report before the midterm elections, and despite the Fed's aggressive moves on interest rates, inflation does remain stubbornly high. The Labor Department reported this morning that prices rose 8.2% last month compared to last September, which is slightly above what it was predicted. Overall, inflation is down a bit from the summer peak, but it's still near the highest levels that we've had since the 80s. Keep in mind, the price of gas is now going up more than 20 cents a gallon over the last month. On Wall Street, markets responded first negatively, then positively to today's inflation numbers. The Dow ended up 2.8% today after initially tanking for a while. S&P and NASDAQ were also both up more than 2% on the day. Let me bring in our NBC News business and data reporter, Brian Chung, today to run us through this report. And Brian, I'd love for you at the end of when you run through, how much of this is still supply chain? How much of this is still workers? How much of this is basically just cash.
Yeah, it's going to depend on what category you're looking at, right, Chuck. But let me just kind of walk you through the numbers one more time. The change from August of this year, 0.4%. That's the difference in prices. But again, it's really this year-over-year number that we want to highlight here. This is what Americans are feeling. Prices 8.2% higher than they were a year ago. And that, by the way, was higher than the Wall Street estimate of about 8.1%. So a bit of a surprise on that report. Now, let's contextualize this within what we've seen in previous months. What you're looking at here on this line chart is the year-over-year change for prior months. And essentially what you're seeing is we're really going sideways here. You can make the argument that, yes, we've come down a little bit from the about 9.1% high that we had seen earlier in the summer. But this is not going to be a noticeable change for Americans forced to pay more at the store. If we do break down exactly what is getting more expensive, you can see here food getting more expensive. Specifically in the month of September, interesting to see that poultry and also pork got more expensive. But some things did actually get cheaper when you take a look, for example, at used cars. Also, gas prices coming down, although you do wonder, again, this report covers the month of September. That story could be changing as gas prices have gotten up over the past few weeks, Chuck.
You know, Brian, remember about 6 months ago, it was gas and used cars that were driving this, and then we would show it actually shelter and food were in it. How much of this is still the sort of the screwy business cycle the pandemic created? We have a labor shortage issue in this country, particularly lower wage, which seems to be the issue with lack of food. And then when you hire, you got to pay more in salary to get them, which in turn raises the price.
There's a lot to unpack there. And, you know, when you talk about food, for example, I mean, that is where supply chain definitely comes in, because what's one reason why food got more expensive? You think about bird flu killing a lot of chickens, egg prices got much more expensive, and there's a drought on the West Coast that has affected a lot of produce, which has led to vegetables getting more expensive. But it's really interesting to see the shelter side of things, because when you talk about the wonky things that have happened with the pandemic, if I just advance the slides back here, what we're really seeing is that people who got pandemic deals, they're now getting their rents raised $1,000, $1,200 in the case of New York City. Some people have felt that.
There was a freeze for a couple of years, and now those freezes are lifted.
And that kept rents low. But what's happening now, and again, 0.7% doesn't seem like a lot, but keep in mind, these are 12-month leases, or it also reflects mortgage payments as well. People are locked in for 30 years to whatever they paid for a house. And we know home price appreciation was hot. So this is something that is really going to be lingering. Some economists call this a more sticky component of inflation. We'll have to see how the next few months unfold.
Brian Chung, thank you very much. Nice to have you here. With me now is Betsy Stevenson, former member of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors, former chief economist at the Labor Department. She's now a professor at the University of Michigan. You know, Betsy, it does seem to be that is this... It's going to take us a decade to decide whether how pandemic-driven this inflation issue is. But do you see light at the end of the tunnel here?
Well, I mean, I definitely see light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, I think, first of all, the Federal Reserve is going to take action. They're going to raise rates, and they're going to bring inflation down. And I think if you look at inflation expectations, most people expect the Fed to be successful in bringing inflation back down to 2%, where its target's at. So I think the question is, will we be successful in getting inflation down? We will. The question is, how painful will the journey be as we get inflation down?
The decision by OPEC to do what they did, which is inevitably going to lead to some some economic pain globally. How much is that going to impact the Fed's next decision, do you expect? There seem to be promising at least a half point, if not another 3/4. Does the OPEC decision, would you anticipate that becoming something they consider as a way to maybe, all right, we're only going to go a 1/4 point with the next interest rate rise?
You know, I think the Fed has one tool, and that tool is to try to bring demand down. And we get inflation when demand exceeds supply. So it's not good news to hear that OPEC wants to restrict supply because that's going to push prices up. But I think the bigger problem for the Fed is not what OPEC's doing or not doing. In fact, the Fed usually tries to focus on core inflation and ignore the volatility of energy. What's problematic in this report was that we saw inflation really spreading into the service sector in a way that is at sort of at a higher level than I think a lot of people were expecting. You know, we did see inflation in goods is starting to normalize, come back down. We saw In the inflation rate for the month in durable goods was negative, so prices are coming down a little bit there. But what's going up are services. And I don't think we're done with that journey yet. So if you think about like housing prices, so if you own a house, the fact that your house is worth more now is good for you, probably. But if you got to buy a house, that's a problem. And if you're renting, and you haven't gotten an increase in your rent in the last 12 months, you're probably going to get a notice sometime soon. And so we know we're going to see increasing shelter inflation for months to come. And then let's look at something like food prices. So food at home has gone up by over 11%, but food at restaurants has not. It's only gone up by around 8%. So what that's saying is that, the labor side of things hasn't been putting as much pressure on inflation as the stuff. So it's now like the relative price of eating out, it got cheaper relative to eating at home. But presumably we're going to hit a point where workers want wages. And we started to see that a bit, want wage increases. And we started to see that a bit in this report with wage increases for physician services or veterinary services.
Well, this goes to the whole demand for labor. We have a low-wage labor with dearth of it. Obviously, the Fed can't magically increase the labor supply, but Congress and the White House could. But that's a whole nother story. Betsy Stevenson, we've discussed our immigration problems before on this topic. Anyway, as always, really appreciate your expertise on all of this, so thank you. So the fallout on inflation, January 6 revelations, Trump legal mess. I'm going to have a panel next. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
This leads us to a key question. Why would Americans assume that our Constitution and our institutions in our republic are invulnerable to another attack? Why would we assume that those institutions will not falter next time? A key lesson of this investigation is this: our institutions only hold when men and women of good faith make them hold, regardless of the political cost. We have no guarantee that these men and women will be in place next time. Any future president inclined to attempt what Donald Trump did in 2020 has now learned not to install people who could stand in the way.
Welcome back. That was Liz Cheney laying out exactly what she believes is at stake in these midterm elections at today's January 6th hearing. It's the last one we'll see before voters head to the polls in November, and in many ways, the swan song for anti-Trump Republicans, like Cheney, who had lost her primary earlier this year. I'm joined on set now with my panel today, Democratic strategist Basil Smikle and Commentary Magazine editor Noah Rothman. All right, Basil.
Yeah.
Trump's been subpoenaed. Does it matter on the ballot for November?
Well, if he flails or starts waving his hands and, spits anger at the Democrats, then I think the Democrats will find a way to play that up. I don't know that it actually matters. The voters have a lot on their mind right now with this inflation news, which and for some candidates, crime. You heard Lee Zeldin talking a lot about that in New York and closed the gap a little bit with the Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul. So those things I think are going to resonate more. But it would make for maybe good talking points on the Dem side.
It's interesting, Noah. I've already heard from some conservatives, and you might have, saying, hey, it could only fire up the Trump voter, this subpoena, if he plays the grievance victim card. What say you?
Yeah, but it fires up everybody else in the wrong direction. Anytime Donald Trump is at the top of the headline, it's not great for Republicans. We saw this in August after the Mar-a-Lago raid, in combination with the ruling in Dobbs. It reminded voters about everything they don't like about Republicans, because all of a sudden they stand for something. They're no longer a generic vehicle of opposition to the party in power. They actually have people, they have ideas, they have candidates, and we don't really like all of them. If Republicans are lucky, this goes nowhere. It mires down in litigation, and Donald Trump keeps his head down, and that's the best thing they can hope for.
Basil, we saw that report in Politico today. I think there's maybe, there's just a handful of ads that do January 6th. The most prominent I see actually is, I think there's an open seat race in Wisconsin, the 3rd district, where the Republican was at the Capitol on January 6th, and it's a very closely contested race. It's probably one of the few where I think it might be front and center, maybe even in Washington State where Jamie Herrera Butler lost.
Yeah, and I take Bernie Sanders' op-ed at its, for what it says. Abortion's very important.
Yeah.
Got to be on the front burner. But Democrats can't cede ground to Republicans on any of the other issues. And if we talk about only abortion and only January 6th, although those are obviously polling very well and they are mobilizing for Democrats, we cannot lose ground on anything.
Let me talk about an issue that hurts both parties here, meaning it's the decision, do you respond to your negatives or do you ignore them and just go forward, right? So you just brought up abortion on January 6th, and some Democrats would say, no, just focus on what you think works, right? With Republicans, I've heard this, tune out the abortion issue, just focus on prices, focus on crime. How much time should some of these candidates try to spend some time inoculating themselves on abortion, inoculating themselves on crime? Noah, you first.
So Republicans have spent a fair amount of time fielding questions about their approach to abortion, their philosophy on abortion, whether this is a state's issue or a federal issue, in part because this ruling has shed a lot of light on the pro-life movement. Recently, in the last couple of weeks, we've started to see Democrats have to explain what they believe. Had to say, well, maybe I don't really think there should be any limits on abortion up to 9 months. This is just as out of step with the public as a doctrinaire pro-life view that doesn't view any exceptions outside of the life of the mother as something that should be law. And to the extent that Democrats have to defend their position on this, it does help Republicans. It makes them look far less extreme. In light of, for example, most recently, a couple of interviews with, for example, Stacey Abrams in Georgia, Lindsey Graham's 15-week ban doesn't look all that extreme. It actually looks very close to what the national consensus on the issue would be in the absence of Roe, and probably would have gotten there decades ago. We've just interrupted that process, and we're coming around to it. It's just Lindsey's mistake was to make that a federal issue and not a state-level issue. And people on the federal Republicans looking for federal office don't want to talk about it.
Right. Listen, I think that's something like reproductive rights. I think is built in. If you don't have an opinion about that now, and it's not mobilizing you now, I don't know that it ever will. So I do think Democrats have an opportunity to pivot here. If you listen to Tim Ryan the other day in his debate, looking at him, watching him going off against Vance and really sort of putting it to him in terms of law enforcement. How could you stand for January 6th and then say that you support law enforcement in this country? That is actually quite powerful. What bothers me about that is that he's also complaining that Democrats nationally are not putting money behind his race. And to me, that's what's so concerning, that if Democrats have the opportunity to talk about other issues and they're doing it in a strong enough way, is the National Party actually going out and supporting that? Those two things have to work in tandem.
It is in conflict.
I feel like that is just such a flip approach to the issue of crime. It's saying, okay, well, this black swan event that has happened once in the history of the United States, where do you stand on that versus the day-to-day crime that people experience in their average lives, the people who they know who've been mugged or have had a gun put to their head? The commonality of crime is the problem here, not these one-off black swan events. And to say that, well, if you're soft on that, you're soft on everything.
January 6th is a black swan event? I mean, it's the destruction of our democracy.
God save us. Sure.
But I don't actually think that Democrats are not talking about it. I think Tim Ryan understands that. He is
You just brought up something, though. The two best Democrats that I've seen try to inoculate themselves on crime is Tim Ryan in Ohio and former Chief Val Dennings in Florida.
Sure.
Right.
Two states that the Democratic Party's walked away from.
No,
Can you defend
upsetting.
this?
No, I can't. It's upsetting. The one of the lessons we learned from Georgia is contest in every race everywhere. And if you're not doing that, particularly if you're Tim Ryan, who I would say understands crime. He is running as a blue-collar Democrat. And he's arguing that the party is not supporting blue-collar Democrats. When I was running the state party, one of the hardest things for us to do was find Democrats to run in rural races. I mean, this is defeatist at best.
Go ahead.
I mean, the test is going to be in Wisconsin, right, with Johnson and Mandela Barnes. If Mandela Barnes loses by 6 points, as this Marist poll suggests he is. Marquette, thank you. If it suggests he is, I mean, that is the test of the soft on crime message, the decarceral approach to criminal justice reform.
You know, it has been fascinating watching that. Let me ask this to you, Noah. Overall, right now, do you look? Is this a national environment that has wind blowing strongly in either direction these days, or do you feel like it's swirling?
I mean, it doesn't look that way from the polls, but to consult my gut, yes, I absolutely do think Democrats, I think, made a fatal error on August 7th when they passed something they called the Inflation Reduction Act. which the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School says is going to increase inflation in the
Never understood that naming convention. But Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer thought they were clever, all on their own, and didn't talk to anybody else.
Messaging is a massive problem for us this year, whether it's Inflation Reduction Act or having to defend defunding the police.
They're going to say, well, listen, you know, we reduced your prescription drug costs. Nobody knows that, right? We have to talk about it more. What's up in this inflation report? Medical care costs by a full point in September alone.
Boy, it covered up their big happy news about Social Security today.
It definitely did.
All right, guys. You guys were terrific. You ought to do this more often with me. I'll be up here more often. We got two News Now and programming notes. First, don't miss our latest episode of Meet the Press Reports. It's tonight at 10:30. I took a deep dive into the state of Wisconsin, essentially ground zero for America's political polarization. And my colleague Dasha Burns sat down today with a one-on-one interview with the Pennsylvania Republican nominee, Dr. Mehmet Oz. You can catch the first part of that interview tonight on Top Story with Tom Yamas, and then much more tomorrow on Today, and of course right here on Meet the Press Now. We'll be right back with more Meet the Press Now with an update on Ukraine next. Let's turn now to the latest in Ukraine. This morning, sirens blared again in the Kyiv region as for the fourth straight day, Russia continued its missile strikes on civilian and critical infrastructure across Ukraine, even as President Zelensky continues to rally allies to provide him with more air defense systems, and they've been remarkably successful so far. In the city of Mykolaiv, the mayor says his city was, quote, massively shelled overnight, hitting a residential building, and according to officials, an 11-year-old boy was rescued. One civilian was killed, but the rescue work continues. Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, was at that scene of that strike.
Russia is continuing to attack Ukrainian cities indiscriminately. We are in the southern Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv, and overnight, Russia launched 8 S-300 missiles at this city, and one of them destroyed this apartment building, according to Ukrainian officials. And we've been here watching the rescue crews searching through the debris. We saw them remove one body from underneath this rubble, but an 11-year-old boy managed to survive, and we spoke to his parents. He was under this rubble on a lower floor for 7 hours. He was awake, he was screaming. His parents could see him, they could hear him, but they couldn't pry him free because he was under all of this heavy debris. Now he's been taken to a hospital. He has 2 broken legs, he has a damaged kidney, but his parents say they are very happy that he's alive and that he was very lucky to be alive. And this is happening all across Ukraine every single day. We just happen to be in this city and we're able to see all of this. But every time you hear about Russians shelling a Ukrainian city or another apartment building that's been hit, this is the result. Lives are ruined. And Ukrainian officials say that Russia is doing this out of weakness, that it is doing this because it is losing the war. So it is now not just fighting against Ukrainian troops on the front lines, but attacking this country's soft targets, attacking the cities, attacking civilians in their homes. And this attack happened in the middle of the night. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. We heard the explosions, and it happened while people were sleeping.
Richard Engel, thank you for that reporting, and thank you all for being with us this hour. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll have more Meet the Press Now, more reaction to what happened today, and of course, we're back on the campaign trail. Tom Costello will pick up our News Now coverage right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.